our last night there, a lot of us pulled an all-nighter, and for about probably like 3 hours or maybe 2 hours between like 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., let's say, I had like a pretty intense yet like constructive geopolitical debate with these two other kids.
Hello, and welcome back to the Voice for You podcast, where we empower the leaders of today and tomorrow. I'm your host, Jeshwant Vana. Today, I'm joined by a young leader in our community. Keen to fighting international polarization, he founded the Global Compromise Collective, helping spread the idea of diplomatic strategy to young students all across the 6 continents. He is also a thinker, having his research published to sites like All Sides, the International Policy Digest, and Tangle. His work has definitely not gone unnoticed, as he was awarded a Coca-Cola scholarship as well as first place placement for an essay entitled Disinformation, a Threat to Every Level of Diplomacy, submitted to the American Foreign Service Association, and educating our youth on policies young. He is Mr. Ian Rosenzweig. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well too, thank you. It's a beautiful day. It's summertime too, so sun's out, birds are out, everybody's out at this point.
Yeah, it's definitely starting to warm up where I am as well. So
Oh
looking
yeah,
forward to that.
definitely. It's I mean summertime, it's makes every part, even if you're like in this like the north, it basically means it's decent weather at least now. 'Cause it's not too cold, which is
Yeah,
definitely
exactly.
good. Would you say you're more of a summer guy or a winter guy?
Well, I'm a summer guy through and through. Yeah, I hate the cold. So
That's
I don't
that's
know. My
fair.
my
That's
friends will
fair.
tell me I should live in Florida, but maybe someday.
Okay, so to begin this interview, tell me a little bit about yourself, your hobbies, your passions, and who you are as a person.
Yeah, so you mentioned some of my core things in that introduction, which was fantastic. But my name's Ian Rosenzweig. I'm from Philadelphia, or just outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And a lot of my core interests are grounded in diplomacy and international affairs, but that really all comes from a curiosity about culture. And that's really where my interest and my passion in diplomacy started. How do we see cultures interact, and how do cultures work with each other, and what happens when they can't? So that's a lot of what I'm really interested in, and that's where a lot of my research comes in, and that's where a lot of the work I do at the Global Compromise Collective comes in. But outside of that, because I figure you're asking for hobbies as well, I'm also a tennis player. I actually am on my school team, and we have our state final next week, so pretty excited about that. um,
Good luck on
I'm
that.
also, yeah, thank you. I'm also a violinist, so I put a good amount of time into that as well.
Nice, nice. What's your favorite piece to play on violin? I know violin's like super hard. I have a lot of friends here who play violin too. So, what is your favorite piece to play?
Yeah, I have a special place in my heart for Vivaldi's Winter, and specifically the third movement. That's honestly just because I played it one time. I soloed one time with it, and I put so many hours into it that I just still know it like the back of my hand years later. So it's
That's
something that
fair. That's
I think I'll
fair.
always love.
Yeah. It's definitely with like music too. The more that like, you practice, the more it gets stuck in your head, and the more emotionally connected you get to. I am a vocalist myself, so I definitely understand. I've been a musician for a good part of my life, so I definitely understand where you're coming from there. So before we take any like serious, hard-hitting questions, I like to start off my interviews more lighthearted. So if you could sit down and have dinner with any person, any time in history, who would it be and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Cyrus the Great, who was a Persian ruler thousands of years ago. And it's funny, I've already mentioned a little bit about, my thing for cultural interchange, and it sort of comes back there. Cyrus the Great, when he conquered territory, he's pretty well known for letting a lot of the cultures remain intact, and for, not imposing Persian culture on the new territory that his empire was expanding into. And that's a concept that I think we could learn a lot from today. So
Definitely.
it's something that you know just to kind of see where that came from in a not very kind world, how that really diplomatic attitude came to be. I think that would be fascinating.
Definitely, as a diplomatic man yourself, talking to one of the first ever examples of diplomacy and how that started, that definitely is something. So obviously you are a, well, senior with graduation season coming around. First off, congratulations on graduating high school. I know it's a very big deal here in the States. But, you've obviously committed to college. So where have you committed to college, and what attracted you to that college and decide to go there?
Yeah. So I'll be heading to Princeton University next fall. And there are a lot of reasons I could give for why I loved Princeton, and some of them are probably better reasons than others. I think that the answer that I gave when I finally chose was a very simple one, and it was following some advice that I got from a teacher, which was just, when you tour, try not to overanalyze it and just feel it, right? And that's something that I think is advice that anyone could take, because there are reasons, that this school is great and that school is great. And my teacher said to me, you could probably write a fantastic essay about why you should go to any of these schools that you're touring. But, the feeling that you have while you're there is what's really important, because that's where you're going to be living, and that's where you're going to be feeling for the next 4 years of your life.
Definitely.
So that's my kind of cop-out answer. But if I am going to give you the more like specific reasons, I really loved the undergrad focus at Princeton. There are there's no med school, there's no law school, so a lot of the professors are focused on their undergrad students, and there's a lot of opportunities for research there. They also have one of the leading schools in international affairs. The School of Public and International Affairs is a really great program, and I love that. And then also, I just, and this is also important just from a lifestyle perspective, that the campus just was very much my speed, right? It's not a city campus. I'm from the suburbs. It's a suburban campus, and it felt right to me.
Definitely. This basically does dictate where the rest of your life has gone. And, going to such an amazing school and such a prestigious school as Princeton, definitely, obviously you'll have all of your work with the GCC and your research published. So obviously you have a reason that you are going there. So, but it does, like you say, dictate the rest, like the 4 years, the community and all that too. And, like you said, it is since there's no law school or grad school or anything like that, they have more time to focus on you. It's all undergraduate students there too, so it's more, tight-knit community than having people worry about grad school, law school, med school, all that. So definitely. So obviously you are the founder and current CEO of the Global Compromise Collective, which I will just call the GCC, because those 3 words, I'll be honest, they're big words.
I call it
So
GCC too.
yeah. So what is the GCC, and how did you come up with the idea/initiative?
Yeah, so GCC is a collective, an organization that crosses borders. We're international, and our ultimate goal is to provide education about diplomatic strategy and how we can solve both international problems with diplomacy rather than war or violence or things like that, but also domestic problems. So problems in the United States with political polarization, diplomacy, and the things that we see diplomats do to solve problems between countries, to solve problems between our kind of ever divided political parties. So that's looking at bipartisanship and nonpartisanship. So that's our ultimate goal, and we do that through a couple of key initiatives. We have a middle school curriculum unit, which is a 5-lesson unit that explores what is compromise, how do we give and get, making concessions in order to get some of the things that we want, but recognizing that we can't always win outright. And then we do some practice with that. And then we also have an online high school program. We call it our Compromise Fellowship. And our Compromise Fellowship is more international work. We've had fellows from 6 continents, which is one of my favorite statistics ever. I love that you kind of cited that in your introduction. But so that's what we do. And then you asked, how I came up with the idea for that. It's kind of a funny story. I worked at another youth nonprofit And I should mention GCC is entirely youth led. We call it By Teens for Teens. But I worked at another By Teens for Teens nonprofit. It was called the Foreign Policy Youth Collaborative, and I served as a director there. I was in charge of editing all of the content that they were putting out, and that group started to kind of dissolve about 6 months after I had joined, which was a real shame. It was just sort of the administrative side sort of fell apart there, and I had absolutely loved my time. I was meeting people around the world. They had international membership as well. It was both an opportunity for me to learn a lot, but also just to meet new people and to really just explore and learn a lot more about the world around me. And I was really disappointed to see it go. And I was kind of just complaining about that. And eventually, a friend of mine who was also at FPYC, and we were talking, and we just kind of said to each other, like, what if we did this ourselves? We could do this. And when we were talking about the idea, because we weren't just gonna like redo what FPYC did, the core thing that I wanted to incorporate that I didn't see enough of at FPYC was actually taking action and kind of doing things. FPYC was a lot of discussion and a lot of writing, and it was a forum to talk with other teenagers about foreign policy. What we do at GCC is we write this curriculum and we run these programs. We're more of like a company than a networking group, although we do have that networking element. And because of that, I'm able to see our impact much more broadly, right? We're reaching people with our content, and our topic, our subject matter is also very specific, right? It's how do we solve problems by coming together and, making sure that everyone's getting a little bit with a compromise. Everyone's getting something, but not getting everything. And that's always something that's been super important to me, just from a political perspective. How do we bring people together is what I've always wanted to do. How do we find unity?
Definitely. Also, just as a personal question myself, could you define, like I did mention the word like international polarization, but could you define more or elaborate more on what that is, just for like people that are viewing, maybe they don't understand the topic more deeply? Or I've personally always found like policy and all that pretty interesting. So could you explain more what international polarization means?
Yeah, so polarization as a general matter is when there are, kind of two poles of an issue, two separate sides, and they grow further and further apart, further toward the poles. You can think of it as like, the
Yes.
Arctic and Antarctica, North and
Yeah.
South Pole. So as they grow further apart, the middle ground that they're able to find becomes more and more elusive. So when we look at that on an American level, right, we're looking at the Democrats and the Republicans and
To
how
the
difficult
Republicans.
that has
Yeah.
become for them to find policy issues, right, on their separate poles. And on an international level, we can see it sort of in a number of different conflicts, right? And any conflict that you see where people are unable to engage in dialogue, where there's hatred, where there's things devolve into violence, that's kind of peak polarization, right? That is, so far apart and so exclusive of each other that there can be no constructive dialogue. And that's why I always encourage compromise when we get to that polarized state, because what compromise does is it's a win-win, but it's also a lose-lose. So it's bringing these, because you can't, both sides, when they're this far apart, they can't both win. It's impossible. So how do we get them both
Yeah.
to win a little bit? We have to give a little bit.
Yeah, which is definitely the second C, global compromise. Oh, actually, that's the first C, my bad. Global compromise. That's definitely something that in today's society, a lot of people can't agree on stuff. So the fact that you're trying to find, especially on an international level, is truly great. But also, your team is not just based, like you said, you did meet one of your board members from FPYC. But how did you get the rest of your team on board with all of this initiative? Because I'm assuming, because it is like nationally scaled, like obviously it's internationally scaled, like the program itself. So your board's definitely not just gonna be from where you're from in Pennsylvania. So how did you get all these people on board and
Yeah,
join
so
the show?
our original board was people that we knew from FPYC. So that was our original group of directors. None of them are with us anymore because they've just, they've moved on. They've, graduated high school and they're, doing other things with their lives. But What that was our original group, and from there, a lot of our growth was through social media and Instagram in particular. As you know, Instagram is a pretty great way to just kind of reach out and
Oh,
find
oh,
people.
definitely.
Yeah. So
Definitely.
we did a lot of networking on there. We did a lot of outreach. We did reach out to some platforms that promote whether it's teenage internships or other opportunities that could just sort of share what we were working on with their networks. That's how a lot of people found us. And after that, I think a little bit we spread through word of mouth. So we have some people who brought a friend from their Model UN or a friend from some other club at their high school, and then others sort of found us just through Instagram. Instagram is incredible at marketing. So, just if we
Definitely.
post enough
Definitely.
content and we get it reshared enough, we end up doing pretty well. And then, we also use other platforms, and we did do a fair bit of outreach as well. We use LinkedIn to do some outreach. We also have done work through just, doing some research on people. So one of our directors in our early days, we I don't know if you're aware of Jubilee. It's sort of a platform that does
Oh,
videos.
yes. Yeah. Oh my God. I am a Jubilee watcher, dude.
Yeah. So there was a Jubilee video, and it was entitled something along the lines of like high schoolers, find bipartisan policy solutions, something like that. And we just reached out to all of the high schoolers who were on that video. And one of them got back to us, and she was our programs director for about a little over a year. So it was really just kind of just trying to plug enough holes and find enough different places that we, had some people come in.
Definitely, definitely. No, that's been a common theme with everyone that I've talked to so far. Network, network, network. It takes you from a little tiny opportunity to something bigger. Like the fact that y'all, watched the Jubilee video. When I watch Jubilee, I'm just watching it for fun. Like y'all actually like took the people and like you flipped it into something good, which is truly admirable, dude. Like that's crazy. And also the Jubilee video. The thing about Jubilee is that it covers all topics and it's not willing to, step down from the controversial. So you got all sides of, the scale, and you were able to reach out to them. And, they're also high schoolers too, which fits the for youth by youth motto that y'all have with the GCC. So not only does the GCC have relations in North America, but also the other 5 continents that humans inhabit. You obviously can't do all 7 because the only thing located in Antarctica is penguins. But how were you able to reach out and market to people like abroad in like different countries and different continents as you?
Yeah, again, that's what social media was really great for. There are no borders on social media, so we were able to just kind of. A lot of people came to us, to be honest, right? We were posting, we were resharing our content, and it was a combination of content that was showing what we stood for. So we would do posts about international issues, and I always call, when I talk to my marketing team now, I say like we need a compromise angle on this story. So we're not just writing about something in the news. For example, recently we were covering President Biden's cancer diagnosis, but like what's the compromise angle?
Yes.
What does this have to do with what we do? Because we're not just going to rewrite a New York Times story. That's useless, right? We
Yeah,
can't do that nearly as
exactly.
well or as quickly as they do. So looking for that angle, and that was kind of showing people what we do and what we stand for, and then we would supplement that with posting like, okay, join us. Here's, if you like what you're seeing here, here's how you can contribute to our cause. So that was how
Definitely.
we got a lot of people interested, I think. Also, something that was beneficial was when we had our first fellowship program, our compromise fellowship, we gave the opportunity for anyone who was a fellow in that program to then become a member. So they participated in our fellowship. After, it was originally 8 weeks, it's now a 6-week program, but after those 8 weeks they would join one of our departments, and maybe they'd lead the next fellowship program, or maybe they'd work on writing our curriculum or building Instagram posts or things like that. So kind of creating that pipeline. We would teach people, they would learn about our work, and then they'd be able to do our work.
Definitely. So is the curriculum like, do you all do like Zoom classes or is it just like all asynchronous work? And if it is Zoom classes, How are y'all able to manage with the obviously different time zones? Like the US will has four time zones itself. So imagine the rest of the world. Like we're a different time from like say Japan, and like I know India is like 13 hours ahead of us. So how, if it is Zoom, how does you manage that?
Yeah, so our high school compromise fellowship is Zoom. There's Zoom sessions, and that's how we practice debate and negotiation and things like that together, as well as do sort of more lecture-based work. And you have identified probably one of the biggest challenges that we faced, which is how do we get these people in the same room to talk to each other and learn from each other? Because that was sort of the whole point, is that you're meeting people from different places with different, they know different things and their cultures are different. But yeah, the time zone was really difficult. What we ended up doing was, I think it really came down to my team's willingness to just kind of put all of our time and energy into this work because we cared so much about it and we believed in it. So that meant we were splitting our cohort into kind of two sessions every week when we had time zone issues. So it was rather than one hour long meeting every week, it was two, and maybe they were longer than an hour, so that we could get the different time zones. So maybe we would have something that people could make if they were, if it was 9 a.m. in Eastern time, then it's only 2 p.m. in Europe, or 3 p.m. in Europe. So they were able to
Exactly.
join us there. And then 9 a.m. our time is 11 p.m. in Australia. So when we had an Australian, that kind of wasn't going to work. So that's when we split into this second
So we had to
cohort, and
definitely.
that meant that essentially my team and I were on meetings double as long and at pretty inconvenient hours. And I will say that that is part of kind of my leadership philosophy in a way. Like, you have to show that you're willing to sacrifice and you're willing to give up some of your creature comforts if you're gonna actually make a difference, right? I could have said, no, we're not doing that,
Definitely.
screw Australia, we can't deal with that. But that was just absolutely not not in the cards for me. It was, not only did I care about my organization's reputation and ability to grow, but also that was the whole point. It was to get people from so many different places coming together. So it took a lot of work,
Give
is the
everybody an
short
equal
answer.
chance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Give everybody an equal chance. Because, if they're interested, I mean, they're interested. And, if you care about something enough and you're willing to teach the people, then you're willing to share your information and whatnot. And then, even if they're like Australia, like you said, Australia is like a lot, like it's past the international date line for us. They're in a whole, pretty sure in a whole different day from us now. So, and then same thing with like Europe too. So definitely, definitely. So, not only do you serve as the CEO of the GCC, but as a man of deep thought, you have seen your work published in pretty big publishing sites, like All Sides, which is basically the adult version of what technically y'all do, which is, take stories from every single side so it's not a biased viewpoint. So along with that publishing status, you also have had multiple positions with All Sides. So elaborate more on the work that you've done with them.
Yeah, so my time at All Sides has been it's been a fantastic experience, just because I've gotten to see and do so many different things. I started there a little under 2 years ago as just an intern. I had a summer internship, and I did a lot of, I think my title then was a content intern. So my job was basically to do some writing, do some research, and my very first piece was surrounding, and a lot of the work that I wanted to do was international, as you would expect. So my very first piece was
Yes.
surrounding international reactions to artificial intelligence. So this is 2023. AI is, on the rise, and I was interested in how, I knew how my school was reacting to AI, but how was the rest of the world reacting to AI? Because it was pretty different from Europe to Africa to these just different places. So that was the first thing that I did, and then from there, I did a pretty in-depth study of digital digital media trends. So the Reuters Institute does a report every year on how media is changing in the digital media landscape versus, the print media and, television versus and online versus, published newspapers and magazines. So I did a pretty in-depth study of that, and that gave me a good sense of sort of the world in which I was functioning. And then after that, that summer, they offered me a sort of part-time position to continue throughout my school year. And I I really loved my work. So I said yes, and it definitely did, it was a task managing the time. But what I did in that position, and this was basically throughout my junior year, was I was on their international project, and they were trying to create the same bias ratings for the sources that they have, now. So that's a lot of what they do, is rate sources for their left or right bias. But they were trying to expand that international. So I did research, and I created ratings, bias ratings for sources in the United Kingdom and Canada. I also worked on the South Korea project, which was a little bit more outside my wheelhouse because it required some translation, which I was not equipped to do. But that was the project that I worked on for about a year there. And now I'm sort of just a more general bias assistant. So a lot of what I'm doing now is looking into the ownership behind sources. I'm also back on AI. I do have an interest in AI just as something that I think will define our future, as most people do.
Definitely.
So I wrote a report, or not really a report, more of a kind of write-up about ChatGPT's bias, as kind of bridging the AI and the all sides mission. So looking at how does ChatGPT respond to political statements, what does it support, or what does it claim to support, what does it say is true versus false, because that's something that I think is pretty dangerous. If people begin to rely more and more on AI, if AI is feeding them information that is biased, that's going to be a problem. But the internet sort of does the same thing, so it's I guess not really that different. So yeah, that's what I do at All Sides, and I've sort of been all over the place there, but I'm almost at 2 years, and yeah, I'm always kind of excited to see what they're up to. It's a fantastic organization.
You're pretty, what's the word? Tenured. That's the word. Yeah. So how did you get this position at like All Sides? Did you just like reach out to them or something, or like was it through your school, or how did you like hear
Yeah,
about them to begin with?
Yeah, so I think this is kind of becoming a theme. I just reached out and I said, hi, this is who I am, and here's what I'm interested in. And they said, yeah. So I heard about it actually through a friend who was my co-founder at GCC. So she kind of found it before I did, thanks to her on that. But I think that's the same thing with, how I got my GCC membership, the same thing with kind of how I've done pretty much anything that looks like it's too big of a leap. It doesn't really matter. Like, what's the worst they're gonna do? Say no, and then you're back at, it's the same as if you hadn't reached out at all.
Exactly.
And that's actually kind of been the theme since I started at FPYC. When I started there, their application, when I first came across them, their application for general membership was closed, so I wasn't going to be able to apply to be a member. But they had a position open for editing director, as I mentioned, and that's where I ended up. And I said I think I was a freshman. I was 15 or something like that. And I said to my parents, "There's no way. Like, I'm not going to apply to be a director. They'll never take me." And my parents are like, "Okay, but then you're just not going to do anything. So just give it a shot." And I did, and it worked out. So just giving it a shot, again, what's the worst they can do?
Yeah, that's definitely been a theme with a lot of people that I have talked to. If I obviously like take this podcast for example, if I didn't network to you or anyone else, then we would not be sitting here right now talking. So it doesn't hurt to like talk to them and say like, hey, what's up? If they ignore you, oh well, they ignored you. Just move on with your life. But I mean, some great stuff can happen from networking, as you can see with All Sides and like that. So, circling back around to GCC, I have one more question about that. So, obviously, it's been going on for a really long time. So, how are you and your team able to maintain such a big organization? Because it is 6 continents. So, it's definitely not no small. It's definitely not no small organization. So, how are you able to maintain such high standards consistently?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, props to my team. I have a really great group I have a chief of staff who does a lot of my, like, just administrative upkeep. I have a human resources director whose job it is to reach out to people and make sure that they're doing their jobs and that they're doing their jobs and that they're able to do their jobs. So my team is fantastic, but it's also just having kind of all of my bases covered. So when you start something, it's pretty easy to say, okay, like here's the mission and now let's do it. But before we got to running our fellowship, before we got to publishing curriculum, before, maybe not before we, started posting on Instagram, but before pretty much everything else, we were kind of hunkered down. We were writing bylaws so that we could be a registered nonprofit. We were writing what we call our operational guidelines, which is this like 35-page Google Doc that kind of covers every contingency. And then a little bit later, probably about 6 months in, we created what we call our objectives and key results, which is sort of corporate language for like, what are we going to do? So we have this really great structure that I can kind of point back to when if we are lagging behind, I can say, okay, these are the goals for the quarter, right? The next 3 months. This is what needs to be done. And my directors and my my chief of staff, my human resources director, and then my curriculum programs, outreach marketing directors, they all write reports at the end of a quarter. So we're all responsible, and I also write a report. We're all responsible for the content that we are producing as, in our department or in our specific field. And because we have that responsibility and it's so clearly outlined, it's kind of hard not to meet it because it's so obvious. And I think that being clear in what I'm looking for from my team, they know what the organization needs. They all have very clear guidelines for like, I have 3 points of like, this is what it is to be a director here. And I have, with my leadership team, like everything is pretty outlined. And if it weren't that way, it would be much harder for me to say, if something's not looking good, it would be more difficult for me to say like, you need to get on that because it's unclear. Yeah. So, in a sense, like it's just, I have direction and that's been developed, and and a lot of what I do as CEO is make sure that is clear and that is continuing to move us forward.
Yeah. So obviously you have a executive bond, like teammate to teammate, work to work. Do you have like, what is your bond with your team? Is it like pretty tight, or would you say you're a pretty tight-knit group, or?
Yeah. So we do have, that's something that we actually like actively try to have happen. Every week we have a weekly executive team meeting. So that's me, my chief of staff, my human resources director. And then we have a weekly directors meeting, which is also the department directors that I mentioned earlier. And on those directors meetings, every week we play a little game. So it's, it can be kind of silly things like trivia or like 2 truths and a lie, or we'll do like all about blank. So, my human resources director puts all of this together. So she'll do like a little slideshow with facts, like let's say all about Ian, and then like the group all is guessing things about me. We've done it with all of our directors. So we try to get to know each other. We try to have some fun before, so I'm not just talking to people who like view me as like the big scary CEO. And then my executive team, we're pretty close. We talk pretty consistently over whether it's our messaging platform or when we're meeting on Zoom, and we kind of all know the responsibilities that we have. So it's something that, kind of we're committed to working together. My executive team and I are trying to get together in person at some point over the summer. So that's super exciting. And then as a full organization, because we have our general membership as well, partially the directors are responsible for making sure that their departments are doing that same sort of like bonding activities. But we've implemented some full organization things like that. So we have a book club where we kind of do some readings, and they all tend to pertain to the topics that we cover, so diplomacy and politics. So we have that that brings people together. We also we use Slack, our messaging platform, and on Slack we have a number of what we call random channels that are sort of for water cooler discussion. We have a full organization one that people can just kind of chat in, and then we also have topic specific ones. So Like I have all of my directors are responsible for like their own channel. So I have one who is like a TV show buff, and he runs
Oh,
the like a TV show channel. Mine is all about Harry Potter because that's
Harry
my like
Potter.
obsession. We have a foodies one, and it's sort of these opportunities for people to come together around shared similarities. So again, that's something that's pretty structured, but it was not always that way. We definitely had to work at that.
What? You said you're a Harry Potter buff. What house are you in?
I'm a Ravenclaw.
A Ravenclaw. Nice. I've personally don't take any offense, but I never was attracted to Harry Potter. Was it? I remember my mom when I was younger, she made me read the first book because, like,
Hmm.
everyone else was reading. It was like, read it too. I don't know. Fantasy was never my thing. It just like, but it definitely the movies are good. Like, obviously, they're classics for sure. Like Daniel Radcliffe. Like those are definitely classics. But from what I've heard, Ravenclaw is pretty good. I just know all of them are good except for, like, what's it called? Slytherin? Yeah, is
Yeah, yeah. I
it
mean,
could be
they get a bad
touch and
rap,
go.
but
Yeah, touch and go there. Yeah. So obviously, as the CEO, what are some ways that, our audience members can get involved with the GCC? I was doing some research on your website that there is like a outreach team, an editing team, and all that. So how does that process work if for anyone that is interested?
yeah, so our general member applications are rolling, so they're always open for anyone who's looking to apply. And we have 4 departments. So we have our curriculum department that develops our middle school curriculum. We have our programs department that leads that compromise fellowship, as well as hopefully another program coming soon, as well as some internal programming. So they put together kind of activities for everyone to do. We have our outreach department that does sort of the promotion of our particularly right now, our curriculum, as well as another program we have called Community Outreach, which tailors the idea is to customize compromise activities to locations that might not be that used to having that kind of work. So whether it's low income or very polarized or that kind of environment. And then we have our marketing team, which manages our social media presence and all of that. So those are our 4 teams. We always have applications open. So anyone who's listening to this who wants to apply, it is just www.globalcompromise.org, and you can find our Join Us page. Also, within the next month, probably within the next few weeks, we'll have applications open for our summer session of the Compromise Fellowship. Anything I've talked about sounds interesting, but you don't know that much about it and you want to learn more, the Compromise Fellowship is a great way to do that, to get some like real hands-on practice and to meet people around the world. And then after that, you can become a member and do some of our work with us. So those are kind of the main ways to join. I also always recommend checking out our Instagram, which is where we kind of feature the work that we do. So that's just at Global Compromise on Instagram. So or maybe it's at Global Compromise Collective. If you can't tell, social media is like actually not like my wheelhouse.
Here, I'll
My
check for
my
you.
co-founder was my social media wizard. So it's
This
one of those.
is
There it is. Yeah,
yes. So
at
if
Global
you
Compromise Collective.
yes, so if
Um,
you are interested, do go check it out. Definitely, this is definitely something, especially for youth, for youth, by youth. Like, this is definitely a good way, especially if you're interested in law, public policy. I know a lot of like my friends are interested, so in that kind of stuff. So I will definitely be reaching out to them and telling them to check out this initiative because it seems like, obviously, because with adults, like the connection between adults and like students, it's not the same as with student to student. They like, you have gone through the same struggles that we have. We still have school at the end of the day. We still have other activities. Like, you are a tennis player and violinist, so you have this along with other extracurriculars too. So you get what's going on. So definitely, if you are interested in public policy or law, definitely do go check out the GCC. Like I said, the Instagram's right there. And definitely, yeah. So obviously, on the side of that too, you have a thought-provoking side, but you're also a researcher, and a lot of your research is on the impact third parties have had on the US. In my US history class, we have learned about such third parties, such as, well, one example is Ross Perot, one of probably the most influential third parties in US history with the 1992 election. So is this under a college, or how did you get this start, or is this like solo, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I think that to some extent it is solo just in that I find it really interesting, so I read about it. But my school does have a program, it's called Advanced Research in History, and it's sort of like an independent study that it's me and there are three other students taking it's technically a class, but we don't meet sort of like within our rotation. We just have like out of meetings at free time in our schedule. And the task that we have throughout the years to put together a 20-page research paper. It's actually, funnily enough, it's due on Monday. So I've been working
Oh,
on this like all year and it's almost done. So it's
just step the finish
and
line.
yeah, and we got the opportunity to research whatever we wanted. So a friend of mine is researching proxy conflict during the Cold War. Another friend of mine is researching the impact of music during the Troubles in Ireland. So it's really whatever we wanted. I chose third parties because it gets at that idea of polarization and bipartisanship that I'm really interested in, and also because like I've been really wondering like when is that gonna happen again? And what's most interesting to me is I looked at third parties in the 20th century. So there are six main campaigns that I looked at: 1912, 1924, 1948, 1968. 80, 92, 96. So those are all of them. And those, the thing, and I don't know, I don't know how interested you or your listeners are, but my thesis essentially is that these third parties arise when the political environment has caused voters to be disaffected with either the candidates or the parties, the major parties, because basically they feel unrepresented. They feel like
Yeah.
neither party stands for them anymore, and that these third parties work. The term I use is viable. They're viable when they promise sort of a complete departure from the status quo. So that's the idea there. And what I'm finding and what's really interesting is that the environment that third parties arose in the 20th century is not the environment that we're seeing now, which I think actually might explain part of why we're not actually seeing that working too well. There are initiatives. There's the No Labels movement. There's the Forward Party, which are sort of centrist third parties that are trying to say, okay, like we're so polarized. Let's all come together. Let's find the middle ground, which is like
Definitely.
makes my global compromise heart happy. But what worked in the 20th century was when it was not that people were, really polarized and committed, like super committed Democrats and super committed Republicans. It was when enough people felt that neither party was representing them. And I think that it is possible that we're getting there. I think that
Definitely.
there are people who are sort of starting to feel that disaffection. But it seems that there are right now, for either there's no one willing to take the plunge the way that whether it's Teddy Roosevelt did in 1912 or Ross Perot did in
With
92 and
yes.
96, but we're not quite at the point, it seems, where people are willing to abandon the extremes that the parties have gotten to in order to support a third party. So that's my research, and it's a 23-page paper right now. It still has a couple of some highlighting and some strike through that needs to get resolved, but that's my weekend ahead. That's a preview of what I'll be doing
You
this
got that.
weekend.
You've
So
been working all year for it, so you like this close. So you definitely have that. Personally, I've always been a history guy. U.S. history is always something that's came natural to me. Like most of these, I do know what you're talking about. And my U.S. history teacher, he gets a rep in our school for when we learn more than half the stuff that we learn in his class is just elections. So a lot of these, like the third party, he especially loved the third parties because he would say these third parties are what, determined who the actual sitting president was. Because say like, yes, they got less than like 10%, but if that 10% went to the losing president, then they would have probably won. Or if it went to the winning president, then it would have been bigger. So I definitely like if you give me like maybe a couple of hours, I could probably figure out and like relate to all of the third party candidates. Like Ross Perot is the first name that came off my mind because my teacher talked about Ross Perot a lot. Like he was probably like the way that he said it, he made me feel like Ross Perot was the most influential third party candidate of all time. Like so
yeah,
in your
that's
opinion,
definitely a
yeah.
fair take.
Yeah, so who was the most, fun or interesting third party candidate that or can't like candidacy like the election year? Which was the most interesting for you to research?
So, I'm gonna cop out and give you two answers.
That's completely
1912 is Teddy Roosevelt's third party run as a progressive. And that one is special to me because I actually that's how I started with my interest in this. I wrote a shorter paper last year on Teddy Roosevelt's 1912 run, and that's
that was the
sort
Bull
of
Moose
served as
Party,
a
right?
yep, that's
Yes,
the bull moose,
yes,
yeah. So
yeah.
that served as a sort of a foundation for my interest in sort of all the entire century. And I found that entire dynamic really interesting because he's really the first one to say, maybe not the first one, but he basically says both parties are corrupt and I'm not. So that's that, and I'm going to change that for you. He's always been fascinating to me. The other one that I really love is probably like the least known and one of the least successful ones, and that's 1980. That's John Anderson challenging Reagan and Jimmy Carter.
Yes.
And I just, I really like him because his entire platform is one of centrism. He's not, he's not a progressive like Roosevelt. Perot is just sort of this like all over the place reformer, and then like some of the less ideal ones are 68, which is George Wallace on a segregation
Yes,
platform.
yes.
That one's less fun, but John Anderson is essentially saying neither side, both sides are kind of he's the first to call it out, like they're going to these extremes, and like I'm here and I'm going to be more liberal than a Republican, I'm going to be more conservative than a Democrat. And like frankly it didn't work, right? Like he got a little over 6% of the vote share, and he didn't perform very well in the electoral college. Like it
Yeah.
didn't work, and there are a lot of reasons for that. It's not necessarily just his platform, but I found to be honest, like I found him inspiring, and maybe I'm the only one because only 6% of the country in 1980 agreed with me, and he's sort of this like boring old politician man. He's not exactly like when you had Roosevelt like screaming and he got shot during a speech, and like he was exciting, and Perot is like this really
Bro.
charismatic and
Yeah.
like he's sort of this enigma, but like Anderson is not that. But I really liked Anderson. I was actually listening to a speech he gave last night as I was wrapping up some of my work, and like I don't know, like I think if John Anderson ran today he might win. So you know
All these names, they're definitely jogging back in my memory. I do remember my teacher talking about like specifically for like 30 minutes talking about one third party candidate who was, I think it might have been during one of Nixon's runs when Nixon was running for president. I don't remember what his name was,
that
but he
that
was
would
like,
have been, if it would be Wallace in 68 probably, because that's
the
the
thing
election that
is,
Nixon won.
it wasn't the like I don't think he Nixon won the election though,
Hmm,
because
okay.
basically what it was he was like smack dab in the middle. He was both Republican and Democrat at the same time. So it really tipped like the US. Like some people agreed with him and some people were like, "Oh, he's not either of us. Like why would we take his side?" I don't remember his name though, which if I go back to my journal's downstairs. If I look at that this definitely should be in there. But obviously, with like Teddy Roosevelt too, that was mainly because he was so mad at William Taft and the work that he did his 4 years. Like before that, Teddy Roosevelt, it's like you building up something really good, and then someone coming in and taking the work, the massive work that you built, like a tower this big, and then just sledgehammering it down all the way down to the point where it's like, I want to build it back up. Like, I did all of this work just for you to crash it back down. Like, what? So that's definitely what Teddy Roosevelt was going. Ross Perot, he was like, I remember my teacher saying that he was Donald Trump before Donald Trump. He was Donald Trump's inspiration. I don't know if you can like elaborate on that, but
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that I don't know that I view Perot that way. I think that Perot is sort of this. He definitely is a populist in the
yes.
style of Trump. Um, but I think that Perot had like sort of this. He hadn't. I think what your teacher's getting at is that there's this appeal because he talks like a real person, right?
Yes.
He's not just giving a speech and he sounds like he's giving a speech, and Trump does that, right? He rambles and he curses and he
Yeah.
says things that are, you know that you would hear more likely like around your kitchen table than on TV.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that that's what Perot was. I mean, policy wise, I don't know, but the other big parallel is Perot's a billionaire, right? He put in so much of his own money into making his campaign in '92 viable, and that's a lot of the Trump parallel because Trump also is a billionaire, and I don't know that like policy wise how much I'd say they align, but what I think the interesting thing is that Trump has also been compared to Wallace in '68. Again, not because they align policy wise, because Trump is not a segregationist, but
Yeah. Hopefully.
because of that populism, because of their ability to speak to people and make people feel like he gets me, and that's what I think. It's not talked about enough, but like Trump's biggest achievement was that he got a major party nomination doing that, right? Like Wallace was supposed to be a Democrat, right? But then he left the party because the party rejected him. Perot never really tried to, at least not that I know of, he didn't try to run in a primary. But Trump did, right? He didn't say, okay, I'm going to talk real talk and I'm going to do it as a third party candidate. He said, I'm going to do it through one of the major parties. And the Republican Party was ready for that, it seems. And everyone was surprised, right? No one thought he was going to be the nominee in 2016. Well, maybe someone did, but it was not the overwhelming sentiment. And I think that that's something that Trump doesn't necessarily get enough credit for, is that like, yeah, he acts like a third party candidate, but he was able to get a whole machine behind him, and obviously that's why he won.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also because both Perot and Trump are both like billionaires at the same
Hmm.
time too, which is what draws the comparison between both of them. And also Perot, I remember my teacher showing us a video of Ross Perot and his like strange like tactics that he would use. Like he would buy 30-minute segments on TV and then
Hmm.
just like use up the whole time just doing God knows what. So yeah, definitely. But third parties are definitely, though they don't make a big impact, it's definitely something that matters in our community and dictates how the rest of the 4 years are gonna turn out too. Because like you can even take like this year too, like with Jill Stein and her campaign this past election, like yeah, there's some crazy ones like Kanye West in 2020, but like there's also people like the Green Party, the Liberal Party, all the actual like parties which do dictate, you know, how the next president's gonna look and all that too. But obviously you are a very public like advocate for international polarization, but on the side too, you are also a athlete playing tennis. So who is someone that you modeled your game after, or like who is your favorite tennis player?
Rafa Nadal. I'm left-handed, and I always had this like special kinship with Rafa Nadal. My coaches when I was like little, they'd be like, this was little Rafa. And no, I'm nowhere near as good as him, but I don't know how technical I'm supposed to get, but like he does this thing with his forehand, right, or he like kind of whips up around it, and it creates
Yeah,
this heavy topspin, and that's why he's known as like the king of clay, because that works so well on the clay courts. That's sort of what I try to do as well. I love to play on clay court, and it's because of that. So Rafa Nadal. Also, he just like fights his heart out, and he is someone who never gives up, and I think we
definitely.
could all learn from that.
Definitely. Yeah, I know Nadal is considered one of the best of all time too. So that
He
obviously
is.
plays a factor too. A lot of my friends, I've played tennis. I would never say I am too athletic. I'm not the athletic type, but a lot of my friends are tennis players. They are really, really good at tennis. I have a lot of my friends do play for our team. But yeah, Nadal, Djokovic, Tiafo, Alcaraz, definitely. And then obviously you have the women's players like both the Williams sisters, like
Hmm.
absolute legends, Osaka. You know, the AP Lang test had a quote from Naomi Osaka this year for the
Really?
argument. Yeah, it was about living in the moment. And, the thing is, did you take AP Lang?
I did not. My school
No,
doesn't do
no.
APs. It's interesting.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Our Lang thing had a quote from Naomi Osaka. And the thing is about the argumentative part for people, it's you can write about whatever you want. it's basically just a narrative to just write about whatever you want. So that was really, really cool too. So obviously with all of these accomplishments, you were awarded the Coca-Cola Scholarship. So how was your experience in Georgia and meeting all the other Coca-Cola scholars and then getting added to such a big network? Like I know a lot of the Coca-Cola scholars from past years are now massive figures in, advocacy and, democracy itself in the US. So how was that experience?
Yeah, Coke was an incredible experience. So I think that one of the best things about the Coke network and about that weekend that I was there is that everyone who was there genuinely had like a passion for what they did. None of them are there because they applied for college, meaning like they just wanted to get something that looks good for college. None of them do the work that they do because they applied, or because they needed to pad their Common App. It's all people who genuinely care about what they're doing, and it's for a lot of times for philanthropic reasons, for altruistic reasons, for actually genuinely wanting to serve. And that's something that the Coke network puts a lot of emphasis on. It's like it's service and it's giving back. And that was just such an incredible experience because it's not something that you hear or see a lot about. And I think a lot of these people are quiet about what they do until they can't be, because they don't, it's not about. There's a great quote that I don't know who said it, unfortunately, but someone put it in their senior quote for my yearbook. And the quote is, "Climb the mountain so that you can see the world, not so the world sees you." And I think that is sort of the epitome of what I think that the Coke network and the Coke scholars are. People who are not all out there so that the world can see them and what they're doing, but so that they can make an impact. And that was really, it was so incredible to just get to hear from these people. And we had some serious conversations in sort of a leadership development institute. We had some more lighthearted, we had like a game show that we did, and then we also just had some great bonding moments. Our last night there, a lot of us pulled an all-nighter, and for about probably like 3 hours or maybe 2 hours, between like 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., let's say, I had like a pretty intense yet like constructive geopolitical debate with these two other kids. And that was just like this like, in no other place would that ever happen, right? Like,
Was one
yeah,
of them Morgan Johnson?
one of them was Morgan Johnson.
I interviewed him yesterday, actually. He was talking about the
Yeah.
exact same situation yesterday too.
Yeah,
About the geopolitical stance. Yeah. He gave me his
and
side. Yeah.
it was just this experience of like, this is something I don't get to do that much, which is hear from people who don't agree with me and actually are willing to have a constructive dialogue, right?
So another great question was, why do you believe you are a Coke scholar?
Yeah, I think to some extent, a lot of it, like there is an element of sheer luck that goes into things, like the stars kind of have to align in a sense. But I think that, you've had me talking about myself for an hour, but I really hate talking about myself, and I don't want to like self-aggrandize here. But I do think that a lot of what I do, it sort of all makes sense together. So when I talk about the GCC work that I do, it all fits in with the all sides work that I do, and it fits in with the fact that I lead my school service board, right? It's all kind of tied together, and it's not just a number of disparate elements that are like, just like, he's done this so that it looks good for college, and he's done that so it looks good for college. I think that it all seems to align because it does in my head, right? Like, I do things for a reason, and I think that might be what was my, I guess that's what appealed to the people who interviewed me from Coca-Cola. They also do, like I said, emphasize service, and I think if you can prove that you're doing something for the good of others, not for yourself, it means a lot. So I guess that's my answer, but to some extent, like, I think it's a little bit of luck, and I also think like you'd have to ask them. They're the ones who chose me.
Definitely. You are a humble guy. The fact that you did come out and say that you don't like talking about yourself that's really something that's doing good. Because there are people out there that if you give them the chance to talk about themselves, they will talk for at least a day, at least. So truly humble, but. Yeah, definitely Coke, especially like scholarships and all that in general, when it's up to someone else. It is luck, but they also see the potential in you to do great things. Obviously, You have so many accomplishments, dude. Like, it's absolutely crazy with the accomplishments you have. So definitely, you definitely do deserve, everyone deserves it. And they did choose you for a good reason. So luck and obviously your skill, talent. But to finally round out this interview, obviously this show is about, empowering the leaders of today and tomorrow. So to round out, what is some piece of advice that you could give to our audience members, trying to achieve things like you have and, get to the position you are today? And what is some advice you can give them to become leaders of tomorrow?
Yeah, I think I could give a number of pieces of advice. One is, like I said before, don't look at an opportunity and say, oh, it's never going to happen, so I'm not going to try, right? Like, if you kind of just try enough different avenues, something is going to come through. So don't shy away because it's too hard. That's one thing. Two is, if you want to get somewhere, if you want to be successful, you're going to have to put in hours. Like I mentioned when we were doing the two kind of split sessions of the compromised fellowship because of the time zones, right? Like, I could have said no, but that would have essentially led to like my failure. That's a piece of advice. The other, I guess, is more abstract, but it's to try to have a clear philosophy about like what unites all the things that you're doing, right? Like, you can join every club at your school, but if you're just joining them to show up, it's not and not because you have something that you're trying to achieve. That's fine, and it can be fun, right? Like, I'll go to things just for fun, but you should tend to like actually have something that you're trying to do. And that's something that we talked about at Coca-Cola. We had a whole session about like, what is your vision? And you don't need to like write it down. You don't need to have like a vision board, but having a sense of like a goal, a mission, whether that's like an organization-wide mission, like what I have at GCC, or just a statement of like this is what I really care about. That'll get you places because it like stays with you. So I think most people like have that and they don't know it. They don't know that it's there until they're asked. But maybe like, if you're listening to this is me asking you to think about it. Like, what do you care about and how are you going to get there?
Definitely, definitely. If you're not passionate about something, then it just becomes a burden on you. So that's definitely something that plays into. You don't want to also like college. I know a lot of people do just stack stuff for college, but if you're
Mm-hmm.
going in and you're not doing something you're passionate about, then it's just gonna feel like all of this is just for one singular thing, college, and then once it's like not really fun, because while you're having fun doing it, then it feels more, peaceful and more, just like, yeah, peaceful, I guess. Yeah, but thank you so much, Ian, for coming on the show, taking a chance on me and, speaking to our audience members. That means a whole lot to me. So thank you so much for that. And to the audience members, thank you for watching till the very end. Remember, do follow us on Spotify and YouTube and Instagram. And obviously, once again, thank you, Ian. And
Thank you for
I'm your
having me.
host. Yeah, and I'm your host, Jeshwant Vana, and thank you for watching.